Now, I've never really been a fan of prime lenses in general. I don't like using them, or haven't liked using them, and I much prefer using zooms. I'm a lazy photographer. It is what it is, but this is different. This is the 35mm prime. So, just a quick video for you about why I love the 35mm prime. Now this I haven't had long. I bought this maybe 3-4 months ago. I bought it just to do some weddings with because I needed something with a little bit extra light. Had the 85 1.8 and decided to get the 35 1.8 so I could shoot on 2 bodies, and I've never looked back. This is by far my favorite prime lens ever. But what is it about the 35mm focal length that I love so much, and why is it that I seem to find myself using it for day-to-day shoots all the time? Now, before we begin, just a little disclaimer before anyone starts going down to the comments and typing away. All the points I'm making are about this specific 35mm, which I found really good, but a lot of these points will relate to the other 35mm primes made by other camera manufacturers. First up, let's just talk about the size of this. This is incredibly tiny. In comparison to a zoom lens, which covers the same focal range as what this does, this is almost twice the size than this, and it weighs a hell of a lot more than what this one does, so this is much nicer to actually have around and carry around with you all day long than having this. This is just a giant paperweight. The next thing is the feature which all prime lenses are renowned for, and that's the massively wide aperture they can give you. This lens goes up to f1.8, but you can get them at 1.4 and 1.2, and that allows you to let more and more light in. Now, why would you need a wider aperture to let more light in? Well, if you're shooting inside or in darker conditions or late in the evening, you may find yourself having to drag your shutter a little bit more, which can cause your photos to be a little bit blurry, or having to crank the ISO, and obviously doing that adds the noise to your photo, which you don't really want. Now, a lot of people who have zoom lenses have the widest aperture of f4, which is not amazing when you're shooting indoors. But if you shoot with the G Master lenses from Sony or equivalent from other lens manufacturers, then most likely you'll be lucky enough to be able to shoot at f2.8. But even that is a massive difference between f2.8 and f1.8, and that could mean the difference between shooting at 3200 ISO and 6400 ISO, and I know which one I would sooner shoot at because obviously less noise, and that's exactly what we want. But obviously coming with the wider aperture also gives you the stylistic bokeh which every photographer and videographer seems to want in their photos. What the bokeh is the creamy background when the background kind of just blurs away into nothing. So if you've got loads of crap in the background and you don't want it to be there, shooting at f1.8 most of the time gets rid of that, and the viewer, the audience member, the person on the other side of the camera looking at the finished thing cannot see any of that in the photo or the video. Obviously the best practice is to get rid of it, but when you're just wanting to take some nice photos, then f1.8, it works every time, makes everything look just nice and professional. Prime lenses, when you're looking at f1.8, is generally cheaper than most zoom lenses out there. If you're wanting to go with a wider aperture, then obviously the cost goes higher and higher, but you can pick up the 35 for a lot cheaper than what you can pick up the 24-70 f4 from Sony, and then we won't even get started with the f2.8s because you can buy maybe 4 prime lenses at a 1.8 for the price of a single 2.8 zoom lens. So how does a 35mm lens look? 35mm lens is normally wide enough to get the whole subject or a lot of the subject in your frame, or a group of people if you're wanting to shoot a group of people without having to be all up in everyone's face or a million miles back. 35mm just gives you a really natural looking photo. It's really pleasing on the face, it's a great portrait lens, and the human eye actually sees around about 35 to 50mm as standard, so that's why 35 and 50mm photos always look really pleasing and natural to you. So what kind of photography or videography can you use the 35mm prime for? Well, I've used the 35mm for product photography, I've used it for wedding photography, so that's portraits and your groups together. I've used it for architectural photography when I'm doing the weddings of the actual venues, and even landscapes. 35mm is just a very versatile lens. One thing I will point out when it comes to videography is if you're wanting to shoot f1.8, then you need to make sure you have a very good variable ND filter, because obviously your shutter speed has to be double your frame rate, and when you're outside shooting f1.8 and your ISO is as low as it possibly can be, you still need something to just darken the image, so a variable ND filter or just a normal ND filter will save your ass every single time. A little hack that I like to use when I'm using a 35mm on something like an 8-7 III with a larger megapixel sensor is if I want a little bit more range, I throw the camera into APS-C mode, and that gives me around about 55 to 56mm due to the 1.6 crop factor which you get from going APS-C and full frame. Obviously, just to make you aware, you lose a little bit of resolution when you do that because you're using a smaller part of the sensor. So if you're shooting at 24 megapixel, then it can go down to something around about 10 to 11 megapixel, which isn't a massive issue. You can still print at that, and it's perfect for using for social media. So that allows me to get 2 prime lenses in one. The 35mm is just a great lens for just putting on your camera and going out and just taking everyday photos. If you wanted to do some nice family photos on a holiday, the 35mm will always allow you to achieve that. And as I've said, it's so tiny to carry around, like you won't even know it's there. But the massive downside to the 35mm is that it doesn't have the range. If you're wanting to actually shoot something from further away and single light your subject, then you need something a little bit more telephoto like the 85mm, and this won't ever come close. Now I do have an 85mm, as I've already mentioned, and when I'm doing a lot of client work such as weddings, I do partner that up with the 35mm to give me that other little bit of range and also give me a little different look. But still then I probably use the 35mm around about 70 to 80% of the time, and the 85 around about 20 to 30% of the time. No matter what I do, I always seem to find myself using this more than any other prime lens that I actually have. I always thought that I would never actually buy a 35mm. I thought having a 16 to 35 and then an 85 was just a great pair, but this is just a lifesaver when it comes to them dark situations, and it's inexpensive in comparison to the 16 to 35 2.8. So it's a great thing to have just in your camera bag, and like I said, a lot of the time it's on my camera anyway. And that's it for me today. Thank you very much for joining me. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to keep up to date with all the future videos that I am doing, and I will see you in the next one. Laters.